take a look at file inclusion. So there's two kinds of file inclusion. Local file inclusion, which we'll see, and there's also remote file inclusion, so LFI and RFI. So remote file inclusion, as the name implies, will actually allow us to load a file from another web server. So we could load up, my spider's still going. So we could load up a file from another web server, so our web server, for instance. So if we're just doing like a request that gets a file, and it'll just allow you to get it like from http dot whatever, then you can potentially like load malicious code from another web server. It doesn't even have to be hosted on the target web server, which it can seem like, how could that possibly happen? But it can, depending on how the code goes. I mean, you can include things, for instance, in PHP from other applications just fine if you give it the path, so that's possible. But this particular app doesn't have a remote file inclusion vulnerability. It does, however, have a local file inclusion vulnerability, which will allow me to pull local files. So, take a look. We go to our newsletters. So if I go to, I was in the right place. So I'm still Mike. If I go to profile and view newsletters, and then click on this newsletter here, I'm going to turn on my burp proxy again so we can intercept it. So we can see in the parameters here, it's actually pulling this from C, inet pub, www, root, book, newsletter, mike@mike.com, web hacking review.tech. So it gives us a full path. So this is going to allow us to actually pull any file that our web user has access to into this little window. So I'll just leave it alone for now, forward it on, and we get that. Right there. So we can pull other files from the web server as well as, again, anything on the file system. So if, for instance, gave it, do this again, edited this value, and set it to auth.info.xml. There is our login information. It's actually all in plain text, no less. Everybody's password in plain text, including the user I created. So Mike's password was Mike. We probably could have guessed that. So we can also pull things off the file system, again, anything that we have access to as this user, basically, since we don't have root privileges on this, that we could pull. So, interesting information. If we had any code on here, like an ASPX backdoor that we had gotten up some other way, we might be able to execute it even through here. But seeing the passwords isn't half bad, really. Maybe there's a place that stores credit cards. Well, there's actually not in this app, but if it was a real app, perhaps there would be. Let's look at another thing. Let's look at command execution. I'm going to intercept off. Don't need it right now. So there's actually this thing called newsletter sign up right here. So if we look at this, we saw that, actually let's go back for a second and look at that original view newsletters. Oops, I actually need the proxy back on. Intercept on, catch. So it's inetpub, www.root, book, newsletters, mike@mike.com. So it looks like there's actually a folder for each user that has newsletters. So my guess would be, which I obviously can be wrong, there's no requirement that developers develop things the way I think they should. But I would guess that this newsletter sign up will actually create a folder for the user that signs up. So what if I do like Georgia@metasploit.com to sign up, but then in the process of creating that folder, what if I do an and? Sometimes, I mean, it just depends on the underlying technology, like, or like that, or and, things like that. I mean, it depends what the syntax is going to be to get the second command. If I do like ipconfig, and I do output into C, inetpub, www.root, book, test.txt, I get that path from that previous vulnerability, and I do a subscribe. Seems to have worked alright. If I go to test.txt, there's the output of my command. So we can actually execute some commands on the system. Again, we're going to be limited by the user that we are, but we could do something like maybe some PowerShell that we saw in our post-exploitation section to make this a little bit cooler. Who knows? It's something we could try.